Bunch of games to go over tonight. I have 7 total. Some of them were drawn from the Chess Study Group Discord. But yeah, since we have 7, I was just gonna get started really quick, and basically yeah, get right into it. The first game is from Hilbert Wolfgame, who played black in this game, and I was just gonna take a look. Basically, he goes up against the English opening and has a pretty good game until there's a piece that hangs. Basically right here. There ends up being some pretty crazy tactical play. But overall, it's an English opening, and I think we can take a look at the theory for it. C4, E5, knight F6, knight C3. In terms of English openings, E5 is one of the more common, responses. The second most common. D3 is a little bit passive for white, but allows black to potentially play F5 or take the center with knight C6. Hey, welcome, Jen. Yeah, Jen just got me a new webcam, which is pretty cool. So if the picture's a little better, or the sound's a little better, I think you can thank Jen for that, because she got me this new webcam, which seems to be working well. But yeah, so C4, E5, knight F6, knight C3, bishop B4, and bishop D2, castles, and basically here, black has quickly developed, I guess this is relatively close to a mainline English game. Yeah, that's a good idea, Kiro. Right now, your game is second. And actually, but you make a really good point, Kiro. I think there should be a way to do that. So I'm gonna try to come up with like maybe a website for it. Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea. If anyone's interested, the games for tonight go Hans Joe, Kiro, Atakes, Grayson, Natiz, Hyperion, and Anch are the 7 that I was gonna do tonight. But you make a totally good point about having like a honestly, like I have some web dev experience. Maybe I'll just do that. Yeah, I can put that together. But yeah, anyways, so this is basically against the English, but I think it's a really good point, Kiro. Yeah, no, I think it's a good idea to have like a list like that we could. Everyone knows every stream what's coming up at which time. Cool. Yeah, thanks, Aphelion. Is it cool if we take a look at that? Cool. Yeah, no. I'll take a look at it. Sounds interesting. Awesome. Cool. So here, there's a few different options. So, basically, it's a relatively mainline English game. C6 gets played, working on the D5 square, preventing knight to D5 or any kind of attacks with that. It's pretty close to equality. No sides made any real errors. Knight F8 is kind of an interesting positioning strategy. With knight F8, it's kind of a I don't know. It's a slower attack for black. You see this sometimes similar moves in on the white side as knight F1 in the Italian game. Yeah, cool. No, thanks, Aphelion. I'll check out the analysis. Thank you very much for doing it. I'm super curious, and yeah, I have some cool games from last weekend in Indiana. I am pretty curious about. I know the one. I think it was 1 win and 1 loss that I ended up sharing on the Discord. But definitely some cool analysis. I'll definitely take a look. I'm curious. But yeah, so here, this is kind of an interesting trade. The knight gets established on knight G6, this is pretty interesting. Knight to E4 offers potentially the opportunity to double on E4 with knight takes E4. The engine advocates bishop takes D2, and then on queen takes D2, knight takes D2, pawn takes D2. There's double white centralized pawns for white, but a difficult pawn for black to defend on D6. So yeah, pretty interesting. you know, Hans Joe is, by the way, is almost a master. He's an expert or a master, so his games tend to be pretty solid, or at least the ones that I've seen. He's played pretty well on all of them. Bishop to f1, and here, you know, I think black has the opportunity to start establishing an attack. I'd have to figure out kind of what's better between bishop h3 and knight h4, but it's kind of interesting. Potential threats on f3 and but this hanging pawn on d6. So here, maybe queen f6. This d6 pawn seems to be hanging, so so that you know, is something that black will have to deal with. I don't know. Bishop g4. Yeah, I mean, I guess you know, things are starting to basically go in black's direction here, but the d6 pawn is hanging. So on queen takes g4, bishop f1, this d6 pawn needs to be defended. I think knight h4 is just sort of, you know, basically kind of an oversight on the bishop takes d6. Knight f3 being the response, king h1, bishop g4. And overall, I guess, yeah, I mean, this is pretty interesting. It ends up opening up the king side for white. Hey, thanks very much for the observe, Crocy. But yeah, let's look at this. It's a pretty equal game. Basically, black's equalized or gotten fairly close out of the English, and maneuvers his rook from f8 to g6, and then moves the knight to e4. Knight takes e4, bishop to b4, and queen takes g5. Overall, black's showing better. And this bishop takes d6 move, it's interesting because this engine's showing a slightly different eval than the one you know, that I was looking at pre-game. I don't know. It's a good question. Is knight h4 too aggressive or not too aggressive? I'm not sure. I guess we can take a look at it. So on bishop takes d6, knight plays to f3. So on knight to f3, king h1. And then bishop or queen move threatens checkmate, but isn't playable because pawn takes f3. But bishop g4 is almost forced. D4, and now queen to h5. I would say. This looks like a pretty good threat on h2. I don't know. Maybe the computer has a more elegant way of doing this. Rook e6, I guess, brings in more you know, more power on this this kingside attack. So ultimately, I guess that bishop takes d6, you know, black allows, and his piece mobility end up justifying it. So here, I guess, maybe queen to h4, but rook e6, I guess, is more efficient. Anyways, it's a strong, you know, overall, this is a master game. I'm trying to figure out sort of what to, you know, what to fixate on here. White ends up getting attacked aggressively and ultimately hanging material on the king side. I don't know. I mean, this is tactics, so it's difficult for me to go through super quick and figure it out. But overall, you know, from this point, you know, white has some initiative. I'm also kind of curious to see if there's any you know, precedent to this knight d7 move. There is actually a master level game played in this, so I guess we can look at the ideas there. This is a similar game played out of the master opening book. Bishop b6, and overall, it looks like the kingside attack doesn't get nearly as advanced in this other master game. The queenside basically ends up open, and the rook plays on the c file. Yeah, no. Thanks, Jack. Please, yeah, please, everyone, send games, and I always appreciate people being on the stream because I think that leads to a better analysis. But at the same time, whether or not you're here, I'm going to review your games. So so please keep sending games, and if my schedule isn't perfect, you can always see it VOD, and yeah, glad to hear that worked for you, Jack. Cool. Bishop d2, castles, knight f3, d6, and here basically, there's nothing. I guess I would say there's not really that much. There aren't too many errors here. This knight f8 move, I don't know if it's justified or not. It seems to lead to relative equality for black and offer opportunities to expand on the king side. In this game, it worked out super well, super strong attack. But I don't know, big picture, it's kind of, yeah, I guess I would say it's complicated. Here, basically it's almost a straightforward, launch into an effective attack for black. Bishop h3, queen g1, queen h5. Yeah, I mean, let's look at. I'm sort of curious about the game report. I want to see the thing, but I feel like it was just basically a straightforward win for black here. Here, knight f3, d6, e3, c6. I don't know. I guess knight c6 is the more popular move here. I don't know if maybe potentially we could take a look at whether or not black is overextending, or black is overly conscious of the move knight d5. Knight d5 is kind of similar to what happens anyways. White ends up doing it as knight to e4. But maybe black doesn't need to expend this this tempo on knight to basically on the pawn move to c6. Maybe black can just leave the c6 pawn where it is and do his knight maneuver with e7 and g6. Maybe that's more efficient. This knight c6 move, bishop e2, rook e8, castles. This leads to a game where probably the best chances for white are, an attack on the king side, or for black are an attack on the king side, but it looks sort of drawish and equal. It's an English game with solid play for both sides. Here, I guess, I don't know. Yeah, c6 is the move that the opening book takes exception to. Here, I guess, probably in terms of engine play, basically in terms of the engine, neither knight c6 or c6 is the preferred alternative. Bishop f5 is kind of interesting, and c5. c5 is also interesting. c5 doesn't have the same issue with blocking the knight, and it ends up allowing the black knight to develop to c6, which is really the most healthy development square. So on c6, the plan for black, I think, is pretty solidified to start moving to the king side. Let's look at this. Let's look at this trade. Knight to e4 is interesting, and then the engine also does not like knight takes e4 here. So let's look at knight takes e4, knight b4, and this basically doesn't end up with doubled pawns for white. It's a fairly strong position with good attacking chances on the king side. The other way, bishop takes d2. This could also be interesting. So let's see just in that alternative line. This leads to potentially doubled pawns if black wants to simplify the position. I don't know if that's worth it. Basically, these attacking, there's a potential for attack on this weak d6 pawn if the position gets simplified and the d file gets opened. So I don't know. Maybe knight g4. Maybe this ended up being a fairly good play for black. But I guess I'm interested in the computer's improvement here. So knight takes e4 is evaluated as worse for black. Bishop takes d2 is considered to be better. Let's look at the top level engine line, the one that gives the best advantage to white here. Basically, it looks like the correct play here is pawn takes e4, and this structure leaves black with this d6 vulnerability. So it's kind of interesting. That whole trade resulted in it basically seems like the type of thing that could potentially be good for black, right? Because it ends up with doubled pawns on the e file. But this d6 pawn becomes a good enough target for attack, and it's not able to move to d5 since those two pawns are there. That d5 is actually not the correct, or the pawn takes e4, intentionally doubling the pawns on the e file is the best play for white, and one that gives white about a point edge. On bishop c5, black is having to come up with ways to defend this pawn. The knight g6 kind of prevents the knight takes e5 move. e5 isn't particularly vulnerable here, but this backwards pawn and these two white pawns preventing it from move forward make this pawn basically permanently backward and probably attackable at a later point in time. Other than that, it's a pretty solid game. Black comes up with some good, a great attack after he moves knight to g5. He sacrifices the d6 pawn and ultimately uses these three pieces which becomes four pieces after this rook, to rip open the white king side and then ultimately win material, win the queen here. So overall, yeah, very strong game for black. The only kind of thing that is a misstep is this trading order here. It's a weird one because you would figure that knight takes is a good way to play this, but the actual correct response, not bishop takes b4, on pawn takes b4, the d6 pawn is vulnerable, and white has a chance of exploiting it. That was the best alternative for blacks, or the best alternative for white was to intentionally allow this doubled pawns on the e file. Sort of weird and unusual, but that was objectively the best. Sure, yeah, no problem, Croc. I'll add that for tomorrow at I'll add that for tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern, if that works for you. Yeah, no, because we're already doing about 7 tonight, so we're pretty booked for tonight. But tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Eastern, I can definitely get that in. Cool. It was a good game. Here's the eval. Look how clean. Like, this is a very strongly played game by black. Basically even the whole way. Maybe a slight misstep here, but basically black goes from equality to taking the initiative and advantage. So strong game, cool one. I don't have a ton to add, but it does kind of show an interesting tactic where white's best move here is actually intentionally doubling his pawn on e4. That's pretty interesting. Interesting outcome. Cool. Let's go to the next game. Well played game, Hilbert. Thank you very much for sending it, and yeah, keep sending them. They're strong games. Just pull up the next one. Oops. Sorry about that. Here we go. Cool. So this one is from Kiro, Kiro's playing black here. He plays the Sicilian. White plays the open Sicilian. With g6 and b7, Kiro transposes into the dragon. This is extremely well established theory. The main line here is f3. Which makes sense. That supports the king side, and this knight is it supports the white center, and it is no longer needed. Basically the pawn and the f3 square is no longer needed for this knight. If e5, then basically the knight can move either to b3 or b5. It's kind of interesting. I guess I'm sort of curious. On e5, I'm surprised that this isn't in the opening book, to be honest. But I guess knight b d5 and this pawn on d6 is close to hanging. It's very difficult to defend. So that's why masters will not play e5 here, because it will cause them to have a vulnerable d6. Anyways, castles, queen d2, knight c6, castles queenside, bishop d7. And here, white is showing an advantage. Basically, this is the mainline Sicilian. The king, basically the king has sort of bravely castled queenside. Now white's going to start an attack, but g4 here is premature. Black's going to start an attack on the queen side. So here, engine advocates bishop e2. What was actually played in the game was this aggressive g4 move. It's a very, it makes sense. White's attack does look faster. This king side is going to be hard for black to hold. But let's look. b5. Knight c takes b5. I'm curious. I mean, there's a lot of tactics, but I do agree that Black's king side is vulnerable. This is a lot of pressure that White's exerting on the Black king side, but he doesn't have his dark squared bishop, and both sides are attacking. So let's look at this. So on g4, it's a quick attack. It's an attempt at a quick attack. I don't know if the best idea is a6. The engine recommends b5 immediately, but that looks like it just hangs the pawn. Although it opens this long file to the rook on b8. It's pretty interesting. Was I okay with the rook on b8 as opposed to more logical rook to c8? Yes, conditional on this b5 move, right? Basically the benefit of rook to c8 is that it gets this open file on the king and potentially threatens the king's safety. It also potentially allows for like knight takes d4. Which has a discovered attack on this bishop to c4. I think that rook to b8 and rook to c8 are both fine moves here. Like in terms of eval, they're about equal. But rook c8 or rook b8 and b5 makes sense as a standalone kind of plan here. The knight's going to take one of them, and then the file's going to get opened with an attack on b2. Interesting. No, I didn't know that, Kiro. But that is actually really interesting. Let's see if is that what it doesn't look like even I completely believe you, and it's cool to learn that. But it's kind of interesting that the opening book doesn't even classify that one. But I guess maybe it's more of a concept than an actual thing. But rook b8, yeah, rook b8 against a queenside castled king is pretty dangerous with the b5 sack. Cool, interesting concept. To be honest, I don't play the Sicilian, so I don't necessarily know that super well. But yeah, this attack, this went very well for black. b5, knight to e5, bishop takes, and rook trades. Let's just make sure if there's were there any better tactical opportunities here. But thematically, yeah, that's a cool one, Kiro. I wasn't really. It looks like a Sicilian focused general strategy, but yeah, that's a very interesting one to me. So bishop d7, bishop c4, rook b8, and on b5, knight takes, but the file's opened and black shows a positive eval. So interesting idea. I guess there's probably not going to be too much in terms of improving on black's 20 move win or 18 move win, but this is a really interesting theme. I'm sort of curious about this. Like, I'm gonna take a look for a second and see if there's other moves. Basically, if that's tried other places in the mainline Sicilian book. Uh, no, it's an interesting game. I mean, this introduces a pretty cool concept that looks like a good attacking strategy in the Sicilian. Uh, this yeah, this worked in this game. So with knight e5 and then either bishop takes or a6. The bishop did. I don't think white had to hang the f3 pawn here, but maybe. I guess maybe knight takes f3. So that pawn is actually lost. That f3 pawn is actually lost from the point when black plays knight takes b5. I'm wondering if there were other better options for black here, or sorry, for white here. It looks like the opening book suggests bishop e2 or knight takes c6 or bishop to b3 are all actually in chess.com's opening book. But that knight takes is a pretty intuitive response. It's cool. It kind of demonstrates how dangerous this open queenside gets for white quickly. So on knight e5, there's this threat on c4 that white has to come up with some response to. This threat on f3 that white probably has to come up with some response to. I'm looking at queen to e2 actually, but yeah, that's worse than bishop e2, which is what was played. But with bishop to e2, that already means that this knight takes f3, first bishop takes b5, knight takes, and then knight takes f3, and the knight is already hanging on the bishop's recapture of the knight. That's pretty interesting. Yeah, interesting idea. Yeah, I guess, yeah. I mean, that sort of points to an interesting concept. I don't think much about castling queenside in the Sicilian, but it does show how quickly these two pawns and the open rook file can generate a strong attack on the queenside here. I mean, after rook takes b5, the eval is good for black, and I understand why. I mean, basically this knight takes e4, even, or rook takes b2 just immediately become playable moves. It's like let's see, rook takes b2 here is just fine for black and really cements this very threatened kingside. Yeah. So let's see. Knight takes f3, rook takes b5, and overall here this looks pretty good. Taking the free bishop, taking this one as opposed to, yeah. I mean, it is definitely, like, it's a super interesting game that Kiro sent. This teaches a lot about how to open up the queenside as black in the Sicilian against a king that's castled queenside. This got surprisingly dangerous surprisingly quickly. Basically white's best option was actually, I think, to keep this closed with either bishop e2 or knight takes c6. But not to allow the b file to become opened. Basically, once the b file became opened, white was really in trouble. Or yeah, I mean, it basically, that rook on b8 got very strong very quickly. Anyways, super interesting. Yeah, I don't see much in terms of improvement for so bishop takes h6. I mean, maybe, but it's clearly a winning move. What is rook d2 slightly better? I mean, I guess. Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right, Kiro. This is a better mate. Yep, this actually leads to mate as opposed to winning. Being up 14 pawns worth of material. If those are the only mistakes you're making, Kiro, I think you're in pretty good shape. Basically, this equalizes, but this shows a really interesting line for the rook on b2. So, yeah, interesting. Can't offer you too much advice, but I appreciate the very instructive. I appreciate the very instructive game. Um, Interesting tactic, really. Uh, yeah, rook b8 with the threat on b2. I mean, b2 is actually a lot. Like if you look at this, b2 is actually a much more vulnerable square than the c2 pawn, if you think about it. So if if both files are equivalently open, it makes sense that the rook on the b8 and on the b file makes a lot of sense to attack the more vulnerable pawn directly. Interesting. And in this case, it really the engine eval agrees is it's basically worth the extra pawn sacrifice to do it. Interesting. Yeah, no. That is interesting. I didn't know that. I didn't know that, Kiro. But this provides some valuable valuable idea here. Threatening that b2 pawn. Cool. Yeah, no. Sometimes it's great to incorporate ideas from Grandmaster games into your own play. Like, there's definitely value in doing that. It's hard to replicate games as a general concept. I mean, the odds that you're gonna play into the same, I've probably played the mainline Caro-Kann more than any other opening to 10 moves, and I only play that 5% of games max. So it's hard to replicate Grandmaster games. But this concept is actually very instructive in that it's broad enough that makes me think about the value of rook b8 in the Sicilian as opposed to rook c8. So interestingly, impressively instructive game. But black makes no mistake, so I can't really offer you any improvement. Overall, yeah, cool. Thank you. No, thank you for sending it, Kiro. I think that's a really good. I think that's a really good instructive game to show here. That definitely points to an opening concept that I think a lot of people could potentially use out of the Sicilian. I should look at that Hikaru game though. I'm curious about that. Anyways, let's take a look at Atakes' game. This is Atakes playing against the French. I actually had a little bit more time to look over some of these games than I sometimes do, like if I have class between matches. But I was curious about this one because I think White ends up winning. Yeah, sure. No, go ahead, Kiro. If anyone needs the link to my Discord, the Discord is here, and just in case anyone is interested, this Discord I think we're gonna try to use as a place to post games to be reviewed. That Discord should work. But yeah, feel free to post it on there like in general or something, Kiro. I'm curious. Anyways, what was interesting about this one is that it was basically a pretty early play of knight c3 in the advanced French, or at least earlier than I was used to seeing it. We've already sort of transposed into something a little bit unusual here with b6. If you actually look at this, line, which is the French, this is the French advanced variation. Here, there's about 16,000 games, and 15,200 of them are c5. So that's what I'm used to seeing, basically the immediate challenge on d4. b6 is an interesting idea, but not one that I know particularly well since I play the mainline French, and this is the advanced French. But we can definitely try to look at some of the thematic concepts here. c3 I think is the most intuitive move. When I saw knight c3, I was thinking about c3 because, as I say on this channel with some frequency, like, a good general assessment of how the French is and who's winning, it depends on the maintenance of the pawns on d4 and e5. If White can keep the pawn structure on d4 and e5, White tends to win. and if this pawn structure is disrupted, that tends to be either slightly better for black or close to equal. But yeah, with that d4 e5, with knight c3, it becomes difficult to maintain d4 and e5. Knight b c6 is the main move here, but I'm sort of curious about why it isn't c5, because I look at this and I'm thinking that c5 is a great way to make sure that opening structure is disrupted for white. Like here, I would think c5, bishop d7, and then pawn takes d4 coming on the next move or two. This I think is, I mean, yeah. So this is good for black for sure. But when knight 3 is played, I sort of wonder about the ability to maintain these two pawns. Maybe I'm being too fixated on that structure, but that's my understanding of that opening. Bishop b5, bishop d7, bishop takes, queen takes, and black's showing a little bit better here. I think black's center is better. These pawns are better than white's relatively isolated e pawn. So yeah, so basically, white has traded into a situation in which his opening, his center, which is important in the French, is not as good as black's at this point. Cool sack, queen takes c6, and I think white gets what, like two full pawns out of that. Don't know about that, but void. But yeah. Anyways, this looks like a pretty good tactic for white. Black hangs a piece here, and ultimately that's yeah, that's kind of an issue. But this is interesting. Cool. So let's look. b6, knight f3, knight e7, and then, but knight c3 I think is the first move that I would change here. I don't think knight c3 is necessarily bad, but I think that black can very mechanically disrupt the pawn on d4 and white's pawn structure for the rest of the game. I guess I would say on c5 here, I'm sort of curious about what the computer continuation is, but I would just, yeah, if I was black here and, oh, okay, so wait, so knight plays to b5, but then I would play, oh, okay, so I see the thing. All right, so cool, this actually expands my understanding of this opening too. c5 is not immediately playable here. What I was thinking was c5 and the d4 pawn is going to get hung. But if you actually play c5, the knight to b5 is played, threatening knight d6 on pawn takes pawn. So basically, pawn takes pawn is unplayable because of knight to d6. So instead, on knight to b5, white has to play like knight to c6, and that offers the other knight. And this offers white the in-between move required to play c3 and maintain that d4 e5 pawn structure that I keep saying is so valuable. So that's what it was. So I mean, I don't know the b6 line in the advance. So this is a good opportunity to learn. But that's actually the thing that's going on here. Because I was like, well, why doesn't black challenge this d4 pawn immediately? And it's because if he does play c5 immediately, knight b5 with a d6 threat, and then black has to do something to prevent knight d6 from getting played, and then white plays c3 on the next move. Okay, cool. That's actually good theory and thinking behind b6. Very interesting. So yeah, so here I basically black is going to challenge eventually d4, and then white, basically I think in line with what I'm sort of saying about this this opening, white basically has an almost 2-point swing against him when he disrupts this pawn structure. I guess the alternative here, h4, c takes d4, bishop takes d4, also disrupts the pawn structure. But this is a much better, kind of more controlled center than with pawn takes c5 and threats of d5 becoming playable pretty soon. Yeah, c takes d5 and this d4 threat from black is just really annoying and difficult to deal with for white. So interesting. Pawn takes c5, bishop takes c5 takes, and bishop b5. But overall, yeah, pretty good game for black. Black has pretty good chances after pawn takes c5. This center, I think pawn takes is actually better. This looks like a really dominant center for black against white's, as the French against white's French advance. Yeah, this looks pretty dangerous, to be honest. Anyways, pawn takes, bishop b5, and overall, yeah, I mean, I think black's better here. He has a pretty clearly better center, and rook e1, but this looks pretty I don't know. I guess I would say this just looks pretty good for black. This is a good tactic here, but white's still down material, and then ultimately white gets this kind of tactical break, and gets a piece up, and wins the game. But the most important piece here, I think, is in getting the early part of this opening right, and in understanding the concepts here. d4 and e5 are the main, the main point of the white side of the French. That pawn structure is very important to maintain. So when white takes c5, that's a move that's very rarely playable in the French games. Basically, I can't even I can't think of a French in which pawn takes c5 is actually a good idea. One probably exists, but if you're playing white against the French, don't take c5. Work as hard as you can to keep a solidified pawn structure, d4 and e5, as the white side of the French. So that's actually a pretty concrete mistake, I think. I think it really is. I think it's almost never a good idea. I can't really think of an opening in which a French opening in which white soundly takes c5 with d4. I think that's a pretty I mean, no rule in chess is absolute, but this one is pretty solid. Don't take c5 in the French. I'm sure one exists. I can't think of one. So anyways, so that's an improvement, and then basically white has black is winning up until the point that he hangs a piece to some nice white tactics. But here, basically, I think that it probably doesn't decide the game, but it definitely decides the initiative for a significant portion of the game. So I guess for a takes, I'd say value this d4 e5 pawn structure, and as a general principle, don't play pawn takes c5 in the French. I mean, because basically the idea in the French is to support d4 and e5. And c3 basically, with the counters the undermining move c5. So c3 there is good. There's ways, like what we were looking at, this maneuvering knight move, basically with on the immediate c5 here. So knight c3 and then c5. Then the knight moves off of the c3 square and allows. So basically there are ways in which white can maneuver c3 to defend d4, but yeah, no, c3 is frequently a good way to counter the undermining move c5. Um, Overall, yeah, I mean it's basically that. This position leans towards Black's advantage for a long time after that pawn takes c5. So I guess, yeah, just as a general improvement, I like ideas behind the chess openings by Fine, but to distill one quick takeaway is try not to take try not to take the c5 pawn with the d pawn in the mainline or advanced French. I think it's relatively absolute. Yeah, but thank you very much for sending the game A takes. Always very good. Yeah, no, that's some cool opening stuff. I don't know that b6 line against the French advance. So helpful game in terms of me learning something, and I think a good way of showing off that French concept. So thank you very much for sending that in, A takes, and thank you very much for participating in the stream. Here, it's basically Sicilian with an early bishop b5. Another opening that I don't know, incredibly well. Yeah. I mean, I guess I would say I would keep going on puzzles, Jack Bellows. I guess things that I would think about are I think tactics is always tactics is always very important. So even though that does sound a little bit extreme, I would say if you're 1550 in puzzles and you're playing open, very straightforward open games, I think your rating will get closer to 1550. I would say, keep going on puzzles until you, in general, are at least 1800 to 2000 range. That's always going to be a big piece of your, that should always be a big piece of your training until you're an expert or master. I guess I don't know your opening theory super well, Jack Bellows, but if you play straightforward opening moves, ones that aren't tactically refuted, I think you should be able to match that with your puzzle skill and wind up in a pretty good position. I'm just gonna turn the light on because I can see my reflection. Is that a little better? A little better at least. Or maybe like this. Yeah. But yeah, so that is interesting that there is that discrepancy, Jack. I would stick with the puzzles though. Still very important. Maybe some relatively new. Yeah, it is a good webcam. It's got a lot of features. I'll figure them out. This is the first try. But yeah. So I stick with tactics. Tactics will lead you in a good place. But yeah, the openings, I don't know. Maybe I would say opening. Make it play open games, and your tactical advantage will be more pronounced. I don't know if you're a d4 player or a flank opening player, but if you try playing e4, I really do think that your tactics and puzzle skill are gonna carry you through a lot. But it's a really good question. So yeah. So anyways. I don't know this opening super well. Bishop b5. The main line here is castles, which prevents any kind of potential fork at any point with queen a5. But white plays d4, which does begin to allow this kind of fork. It's interesting. This queen a5, knight c3. I think is probably, it sort of does help Black develop on this king, but it basically, this move allows White to play a developing move with tempo, which is almost always incorrect. The preferred move here is c takes d4, transposing it into an open Sicilian, followed by queen takes d4, which makes it kind of interesting. Bishop takes c6, bishop takes knight c3, and now we're in a pretty interesting mainline Sicilian. I have to think this is a good eval for white. Basically this queen on d4 with no threats, no real threats able to be played on it, I have to think is pretty good. Very surprised if the computer's reading equality here. I guess it's a pretty complicated position because it's giving kind of an unusual output. But yeah, anyways, this is interesting. I guess maybe part of the reason why the eval probably isn't as generous as I think it is basically because white has lost his bishop pair in this situation. Here, like what I'm seeing is like white controls the center, queen's controlling a bunch of squares, knights are developed, and the bishop's going to be developed to a healthy square the next move. So I would say this is this is probably good for white. And it's not far from equals, but I would figure that this would be like a plus 0.4 or something. But this makes me think about it a little bit more. And I guess the combination of the fact that this queen side's relatively open, the position's relatively open, and this knight and basically the knights are going up against this knight is going up against this bishop, is a asymmetry that's favorable for black. The bishop pair versus not in a relatively open position. But yeah, interesting. So bishop b4 is an unusual move. I mean, you don't actually want to trade this bishop for this knight. So what are the values of bishop b5 really? I'm just seeing in terms of popularity here, bishop b5 is higher up there than I don't know this theory. I've never played it as white. But that's higher than I would think. Anyways, d6, d4, and then queen a5 takes us out of the opening book entirely. C takes d4 was overwhelming favorite for black's fourth move here. Queen a5 allows white to develop with tempo. I'm sure that helps out white's eval. It's now plus 0.7. But yeah, this tactic looks cool to play because you're forking the king and bishop. But at the end of the day, knight c3 solves both of those problems with new development. Yeah, no, it's not tempo. It's just it's basically it's tempo in the sense that white doesn't expend a move here. The queen plays and then the knight basically the knight plays it. But there needs to be some response to the check. I'm using tempo in the sense of there needs to be some response against the queen from white. So bishop d2 I guess would be but it's a free movement from the knight to c3. So knight takes and then bishop d7. Overall, white's showing better here. I guess if you don't like the term tempo, I'd say that free development of that knight was helpful to white. It dealt with an issue, and now black's queen is displaced. Bishop takes c6 I don't think is the best idea. I think I know we're often unestablished theory here, but bishop takes c6 seems unnecessary. I think bishop to c4 is probably playable. Castles g6. Yeah, overall this all looks fine. I think basically it's relatively close to equality. Black probably has a better center. Maybe rook b8 could paired with like a5 and a4 could become something and threaten this relatively weak b2 square. But yeah, overall here I think white's in basically black has equalized, but neither side has immediate threats. Let's play back a little bit more. It's a little bit disappointing, really, because after that knight c3, knight d4, white's over at plus 0.8 on bishop d7, and basically when the bishop takes the knight on c6, the position gets pretty close to equalized. Um, bishop to g5 just hangs the bishop. So I guess we should just move on from that. Bishop to g5, bishop to g7, and neither side advances. But anyways, a few tactical missteps there by both sides. Yeah, interesting. And then basically, so black equalizes, and gets a slight advantage here. And then how does this dissipate? King g7, queen h3 threatening. Queen h3 is kind of interesting, threatening bishop to h3. But this eval flips quickly. G5 is way worse than the preferred move. Rook fe8. I guess it's implying that this actually isn't as vulnerable as it looks. I guess it's saying that bishop h3, the king moves back, and then the queen can't really find a method to get to g2 or get into the black king side. Here, yeah. On g5, basically, white's showing better. But if rook fe8, queen h6, I don't know, king g8, but basically this attack isn't going anywhere. So there's not really much of an ability to advance. So this situation ends up being a favorable black eval. Interesting. But yeah, so we can play through. Let's play just through to the end. But the takeaways here, I think, are gonna be, the first thing is there's multiple tactical improvements in this game. So tactical study, super important. Would have won it for either side, or given a good position to either side. The second takeaway, I think, is basically, I think white's played a pretty good game. They have this weird e5 tactic. But let's go back a little bit further. Bishop to b5 is an interesting Sicilian move. Stylistically, I'm sure it has its benefits, but I see it as a little bit strange, and it's a little bit like the Ruy Lopez, but the difference being that in the Ruy Lopez, bishop takes c6 allows for an attack on e5 by the knight on f3, and here bishop to b5, basically puts pressure on as a pin, but the bishop doesn't actually want to exchange on c6. These are both tactical opportunities. This bishop was hanging on g5 for a move, and then I think basically white has some ideas. Bishop to h6 might be a playable attacking move, and this execution at the very end is good. I think there's some pretty good tactical plays by white here. So let's take it from after g5. So after g5 is when the eval swings from black's advantage to white's advantage, and then bishop d6 is a good move, threatening c5 and threatening f8, queen to d8, and nice. So knight takes, queen c8, knight e6, king h8. And then white gets his two pieces for the rook there, or two pieces for the queen there. Trades the rook and the knight for the queen. So I think that's pretty good. And then a good closing by white here for sure. But the main positional aspects of this game are interesting. I'm not sold on bishop to b5 as a general opening. I'm sure it's playable, but I think it's got some shortcomings. But again, it's a popular enough move that I'm sure that it's very playable. Queen a5 in error, I think. Allowing this development of knight to c3, solving making the required solution to the check and the defensive solution to b5, bishop on b5. Knight takes, and here basically, yeah, I think White's in a pretty good place. That weird tactical thing with the hanging bishop. Yeah, no, of course. Yeah, no worries. No worries at all, Drayson. No, and hanging pieces happen all the time. It's a super interesting game. That bishop c6, that bishop b5 with the threat on c6 is not theory that I know super well. I don't know what it's called even, to be completely honest, but it looks like it plays reasonably well, and yeah, no, I think bishop takes c6. It probably has some advantages, but I know that the bishop is more valuable than the knight. So White would need some kind of compensating factor there to justify that trade on c6. It's a super interesting game. Let's see, but yeah, that piece is there, and I think the engine is evaluating a weird tactic here. I sort of didn't want to go into the like rabbit hole here, but I guess let's see exactly what's going on. D takes e5, c5. Okay, yeah, that's a pretty nice tactic actually. This e5 move forces the d6 pawn, or basically it forces either a trade on d6, in which, so like the knight has to move to somewhere inconvenient, so let's like say like knight g4, and maybe that's not even playable, like maybe knight g8, and the computer doesn't even look at any of them, to be honest, because takes is so correct. So e5 either leads to a significant lead for White if the knight moves, and basically a less clear but interesting lead for White if the pawn takes on e5 and the White knight's forced to retake on c5. This looks pretty good for White. I didn't immediately see this tactic, but yeah, interesting kind of early advance. It's basically an early pawn break that functions off of the fact that this c5 pawn is hanging, and the black queen side is a little bit more open than it generally is in a Sicilian game. So yeah, so like pawn takes c5. Yeah, I mean it's I don't know if I think it's obviously a playable line, bishop to b5. In terms of openings here, d4 is by far the most popular, but bishop to b5 and d6 and d4, your opponent deviates early, and you actually get a good position out of it in this game. But yeah, I guess I would say I wouldn't dismiss it out of hand, but this bishop is not supposed to trade for that knight on c6. I think that's just going to be kind of dangerous. It's basically, giving up White's good squared bishop for a knight that doesn't... I guess, it does have some attacking opportunities on d4. D4 and knight d4 can be valuable. D4 can be a valuable place for a black knight in the Sicilian, but it's not worth the light squared bishop. Yeah, no, I think that's right. Right. I mean, there are lines where it does, but I don't know. It's just not the way that I play the white side of the Sicilian. It's popular enough, though. Yeah, Grand Prix attack is fun. I like that opening. Yeah, the pin is more valuable than the actual trade of the light squared bishop for that knight, though. Interesting. Bishop d7, bishop takes, pawn takes. Yeah, I guess the knight the knight takes the knight on c6 sometimes. Anyways, I would play it if you're comfortable with it. I mean, it's the second most popular move relative to d4, but it's a distant second. Knight to c3 over basically knight to c3 here, defending the bishop on after queen a5. Anyways, pretty interesting situation. Yeah, I mean, I guess I wouldn't say like don't. You've raised an interesting point. I'm not sure I would go to the extremeness of don't play it. It's too broad an opening to say to avoid playing it entirely. It's just not an opening that makes a lot of. It doesn't make as much intuitive sense to me as the mainline Sicilian with the struggle over d4. But I don't know. Openings are a stylistic thing. Where can I actually point to like a really tangible improvement here? Yeah, bishop takes c6. I don't think is right. Grand Prix I think is basically yeah, I think there are some. Grand Prix is interesting. I think Grand Prix is not played at the highest Grandmaster level either, but I think it's a pretty good class level Sicilian opening. That's sort of a fun line to play. I saw there was another game that we were looking at where there was an early bishop to c4, and bishop to c4 is a more playable line in both the closed Sicilian and the Grand Prix attack. It's usually not an opening that's played too much in the Sicilian, but if playing bishop to c4 is something you're interested in making part of your Sicilian, the Grand Prix is a way to do that. But yeah, so overall, this is a pretty good game. I don't have a ton to add. This threat on e5 was a cool tactic that is an interesting break. Basically, if with this open c5 and vulnerability on c5, e5 becomes a playable break sometimes. It's kind of neat in this game. But overall, relatively good. Yeah, relatively good game. Yeah, so that bishop takes c6 I think is probably a thematically not playing it is a more thematically consistent way to play the Sicilian. But overall pretty strong. I mean, great execution great execution in the late middle game. And I guess the biggest correction is this bishop trade. Otherwise strong. That the hanging bishop for a move was an issue. Pawn takes here, I guess, is favored over rook takes. Let's try to come up with the reason why pawn takes is better than rook takes here. It does advance this pawn. I guess it connects this pawn with c4 and d5. I think that's probably it. Why that d5 is so much favorable to rook takes d5. Yep. Yeah, interesting. Good execution. This really went well for white. And I like the fork on bishop d6 here. Solid. So anyways, the overall solid game. That bishop takes c6 might be something to think about in terms of the thematic. Yeah, no. Thank you very much for sending the game, Drayson. I think overall really well played game. The only error was this one small one with bishop g5. I think e5 offers an interesting way to play the Sicilian. You know, those early breaks, e5 here, is yeah, that's interesting the way that that goes. E5, pawn takes, and then knight takes c5. That makes me wonder if that pawn break will be playable in any Sicilian games that I play. So there's an idea. It's an idea for sure. You know, this engine generated one, e5 here, hanging c5. I mean, I guess it's only relevant in the closed Sicilian, right? I mean, this is only relevant in a Sicilian in which the c5 or the c5 hasn't taken on b4 already. But this could pose this could provide an interesting resource at some point for someone. I definitely see this structure sometimes in my game because occasionally I do play the closed Sicilian. So maybe that's the piece to focus on. This tactical resource is sort of new to me, but you know, could be a theme that others could apply, or that I could apply in one of my Sicilian games. C takes d5, knight takes c5, and then white basically you know, dominates the queen side here. It's pretty interesting. So yeah. Very good tactical execution at the end by white, and solid game. So yeah, bishop takes c6 and that e5 tactic are the two things that I think you know, are the most worthy of analysis in this game. Otherwise, solid game, good win. Nice late middle gameplay. Thanks for sending that, Drayson. Please keep sending them. These are strong games. That was a strong one. But it provided that interesting new idea. So, please keep sending the games over. They're cool. All right, here's Natissa's game. Let's take a look. I haven't played through this one yet. Natissa's playing black, so let's take it from black's perspective. Similar queen a5, pushing knight to c6 here. Yes, definitely. Yes, the answer to that, Kiro, is yes, very much. These analysis are super helpful for me specifically. Like I've learned so much opening theory during this stream. Like, you know, for me, especially with opening theory, you kind of get stuck in habits because you're like, well, I know this opening theory, so I'm not gonna, you know, I feel like my best chance is to win, or if I play the opening theory that I'm familiar with. But doing this stream has actually, you know, kind of encouraged me to learn a lot of new opening moves, and also, you know, even some in openings where you know, that aren't the most frequently played at master level. It's really good to revisit that theory because some of those things I just like never got right. Like I was playing a queen f6 line against early queen g4 and early queen h5, and revisiting those types of things. Yeah, revisiting those types of things is super helpful. Yeah, no. So it's a really good question. It's a really good question, Kira. But I do learn a lot. Yeah, no, for sure. It's helpful, and I enjoy it. So I'm glad you guys get a lot out of the analysis, because it's good to see games played by people who have different styles than you. It's, yeah, very interesting. Yeah, thanks guys. No, thank you very much for participating and for sending these games. Yeah. Anyways, let's look at this. So d4, d5, knight f6, knight c3. I mean, we're in pretty well established theory. Bishop b4 is a popular move, and queen a4 is a move too. So knight c6 is I'm actually kind of funny. I think there's a bishop d7 game in here. That doesn't look like a good move. So knight c6 is almost always played. Pawn takes, and then here. E takes, and then either bishop g5 or queen c2. Yeah. Huh. Interesting. I'll look for that. I'll look for that, Natisse. Uh, F6 maybe. F6 is a more forcing move than Rook A D8. But overall here, Black has a pretty good position. Let's just see how this happened. Basically, Rook B1 didn't amount to much here. E3 also not too challenging. And then Knight E5 is kind of the most determining mistake. Knight E5 seems to wreck a pretty good pawn structure for no real good reason here. I think that's White's biggest error in this game. Basically here, this pawn structure is good and well supported. Like, you know, it's really, you know, all the pawns basically, protect this one main pawn in D4. This gives White pretty good center control. This is a good formation for center control. The dark squares here are almost entirely controlled by White, and the light squares here, both probably Black is a little better, but both sides have some light squared strength. So here, Knight to E5, Knight to E4. Could also potentially run into some tactical issues with C4. But Knight to E5, I think, is really a legit error because Knight takes E5 mangles what was a fairly nice pawn structure. Now, basically, what should Black do? Like either Queen E7 threatening E5 creates immediate problems for White. But yeah, this is pretty solid. Maybe Queen G5 threatening G2. But this pawn structure, which had been very nice, this C3, D4, and E3 structure, is now basically this D5, this E5 pawn is overextended and somewhat vulnerable, and this C3 pawn has gone from being backward to being backward and isolated. So both of those pawns get weaker, and the difference in value between the two knights was not too huge. Anyways, Rook to E8, F4, and basically this ends up trading into a relatively equal game. White has the better pawn structure here. It's 3 pawn islands versus 4. They're both kind of mangled, but even with the knight having a better outpost, or a very good outpost, it's still going to be the weaker piece in these endgames. So let's take a look. Knight Rook G1 allows for like some type of kingside kingside pawn play. I sort of like White's position, though, to be honest. The computer's evaluating it as equal, but I think White might be better. This open file seems pretty powerful for White. I guess maybe an offsetting characteristic is the ability to play D4, like D4 after Rook to C8 or something. But I'm surprised. I'm finding it difficult to justify Black's lead here. The open file for White's rooks there's nothing that Black has that matches that. So I'm sort of confused by the eval. By now, White's winning again, and the rook's on the 7th. Yeah, so White recaptures here. But let's just look at this, because I'm sort of confused by the fact that that rook is doubled there, or the doubled rooks there are not getting evaluated as better for White. Like, what are Black's chances here? F5. So I guess the first thing is F5 is a move that can be improved upon. giving your basically allowing white to play rook g7 is not ideal. This rook g7 move basically forks this king and this pawn, and causes a loss of material. So other alternatives here I think are good for black. But f5 is basically, I think, the most decisive move of the game. Black still has some difficult things to go up against. Like rook b7 is going to be a pretty strong move regardless. But I'm thinking maybe black should instead try maybe like c4. I guess I sort of like c4 and then make the, basically get the knight to c5 and then potentially try to take this a4 pawn, maybe. It may wind up with this bishop taking the knight on c5, but then at least you've traded off your weaker minor piece for white's stronger minor piece. So like c4, f5, and then king d7, and I guess the plan that the engine comes up with is getting the king to the queen side and probably a6, maybe. Thank you very much for coming to the stream, Aphelion. Did you sent a game? You sent an analysis of my game, and I'm gonna take a look at it as soon as I get an opportunity. Thanks for taking a look at that. I have a few more games from Indiana that I will get uploaded at some point. But thank you very much for taking the time to do an analysis there. That's interesting. Cool. Awesome. Thank you for that. Awesome. But yeah, so I think that's the biggest, more than any other move in this game. Basically, more than any other move in this game, that's the one where I think this right here, this knight to e5 is the kind of worst fundamental move for white in this game. Knight takes e5 mangles this pawn structure and gives black basically a better pawn structure for a long time, and potentially attacking chances on the more vulnerable pawns. And this all makes sense to me as well. But I think the real move that causes black the most difficulties here is this f5. I think I'm sort of wondering if f5 got played like with the idea of like pawn takes f6 and knight takes f6 in mind, because then it sort of makes sense, like the this h7 pawn is defended. But f5 sort of immediately hangs the h7 pawn. So I think there were a number of kind of strategic plays for black. My eye gets drawn to c4. The computer recommends h5, rook h4, rook to g8, and actually that makes the most sense. If you can play a move that forces white to give up this file, that's strong for you for sure. The biggest asset for white in this position is having doubled rooks on the g file. So yeah, trying to generate an idea or a way of eliminating that is definitely good. h5, I guess, is an attempt to do that. But these two rooks are the most powerful pieces for white right now. This knight is the most powerful piece for black. But f5 unfortunately hangs this h7 pawn, and gives white control of the 8th rank, and this trades out into a favorable game for white. So yeah, unfortunately, that looks like that looks like basically a blunder that sort of decides the game. But overall, I think it's a fairly good game. I think both sides played pretty well. White made that one big error, moving his knight to e5 and allowing you to wreck the pawn structure. But overall, pretty good. Pretty good play. I would just revisit f7 there, or f5 there, because because making I guess you're making your position more open when the opponent is about to get pieces inside, basically on your side of the board. Opening the position in general is not a good idea, and this move also had some tactical difficulties. But from a thematic perspective, this this knight to e5 was a blunder that I think you capitalized on pretty well. This pawn structure is good. This pawn structure is clearly not as good. So it was good that you were able to take advantage of that. And then I think you're in good shape basically up until the point. I think White then does a pretty good job of getting this file open for his rooks quickly. But I think Black is still in pretty good shape up until f5, which hangs I think an extra pawn or two. These errors happen. It wasn't it wasn't a badly played game. A lot of things made sense in this game. White White was putting pressure on Black. Castling towards the open files. That's true. Castling here was gonna lead to a g4 push at some point. I don't know how dangerous that could. I don't know if it had to be as dangerous as it was. But that did seem to cause some problems. I might be tempted. I don't know. I guess I'm tempted to play two different moves here. I'm tempted to play King D7 and I'm tempted to castle queenside. Playing King D7 is kind of interesting. If you can get the King to E6, maybe this is conditional on the idea that you have control of the G file and that you're not getting any threats there. King to E6 would be a pretty good central location for your king in an endgame that's been pretty simplified. If it's I guess I have one other improvement here, which is I sort of think this is good. I think trading this knight for, I mean, they say it's not the best, but I sort of think this might be a good play going into the endgame. The knight is posted well on c5, but trading it for the bishop here gives you equal pieces going into the endgame. Depending on how open this position gets, the bishop could become a much more powerful piece than the knight in the endgame. It didn't seem to end up playing out that way, but that seemed to be a pretty good. I think this opportunity might have been a good opportunity to play knight to d3. It's not on the computer's list of moves, but just from an intuitive perspective, I think maybe like knight d3 here and trade off the minor pieces, and then play queenside castles maybe. But that gets the minor. That eliminates one of your disadvantages going into the endgame, which is having the worst minor piece. I don't know. Interesting thing. I think the main point is Black's position was good. Black played a good game. But f5 was an error that was just a small error. These things happen, but overall, very interesting game, Natisse, and thank you for sending it. Appreciate you sending them. Please keep sending them. Super interesting to look at. Let's look at Hyperion's game. We have Hyperion and Anch as the last two games of the night. Let's take a look. Hyperion was playing Black here. So here, Black plays a flank opening, giving White center control and a little bit kind of easier piece movement. D6, pawn takes, queen takes. This is good for Black. Black's already going to win a pawn here, I think. This is an example of a premature pawn move from or a pawn move in the modern. The theory of the modern is basically give your opponent a spatial advantage in the center and basically in a spatial advantage, better control of the center, and hope that he overextends. The main demonstration of this is the Alekhine's opening, the old like hyper modern thing where basically white gets to play e4, d4, e5, c4, basically all at once, and constricts black's position a lot. But the theory here is that white will get his pawns overextended, and e5 is a good demonstration of a tactically overextending pawn move. After queen takes d1, black's up almost 2 pawns. This was not a good idea. This was not the time to push that pawn for white. Very premature. So yeah, so knight to g4, and one of these pawns falls. Black develops and delays it for a second, but I guess I would just say, yeah, the computer's recommending bishop e6, but I think you can just play knight takes here and have a pretty solid lead. Knight takes, bishop takes, bishop takes. This looks pretty good for black. Sorry. Yeah, no. Thanks, Hyperion. Sorry, I was just shaking my head at Jen. Jen was asking me what I wanted for dinner. But here, this position, you're basically playing a modern correctly. So I don't have any comments there. But your opponent plays the modern incorrectly and overextends and gives you material. So you're in pretty good shape here as black. And then this knight, yeah. So this c4 pawn was hanging. Well, Jen was asking me if I wanted pasta with tomato sauce, and I am okay on that. I might get a slice of pizza later or something. Not sure. It was nice of her to. It was very nice of her to offer, but I was not feeling the pasta right now. And Jen is making salmon for herself. But yeah. So overall, this yeah. I mean, unfortunately, Hyperion, I think this is not a super. I think you did exactly the right strategy. I think basically the strategy here is wait for your opponent to overextend. Your opponent does overextend, and that's great. And then you get a solid advantage. And then unfortunately, c4 is a hung piece. So here I think. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if I have already recommended my tactics training concept to you, but I think tactics training will help with your vision on these types of things. Maybe even doing puzzle battle or quicker tactics trainer specifically is more helpful relatively for these types of like knight takes c4 moves, that kind of thing. I think yeah. So basically, how do you? These things happen to all of us for sure. Definitely happened to me. Just a hung piece. How do you most effectively screen out hung pieces? It's a tough question. My best strategy, I think, is to strengthen your overall tactical skills, particularly as they relate to like 1 or 2 move tactics. I think those are probably the best. I think those are probably the best at improving and trying to reduce this type of error. But it's not really even, it's not a conceptual error. It's just, the pawn was defended, and unfortunately you missed that it was defended. Happens to all of us, with some frequency, but you want to get that frequency down as close to 0 as possible. So yeah, so I guess I would say, I'd go on the standard tactics training. And maybe I don't know if you have premium for chess.com, but those quicker, more simple tactics, the ones like that are on Puzzle Battle and Puzzle Rush, like the earlier rounds of Puzzle Battle and Puzzle Rush, might be helpful. Yeah, no, I totally understand. I totally understand the issue, Hyperion. We've all done it. I've done it, 25 times in my life. Like these things definitely happen. If I guess it makes me want to come up with a way to, solve that problem, right? Cool. Yeah, no, I'm going to start checking out Lee Chess. I didn't get a chance to today, but I'm going to check out Lee Chess's tactics trainer as well. But yeah, I guess that's my main question is what would be the most effective way to stop making one move errors? Um, you know, overall tactics training seems to work pretty well. I definitely don't make, me specifically, I definitely don't make one move errors as frequently as a 2200 as I did as a 1200. But I guess I'm just sort of curious, like, how do you minimize those types of errors? I don't have a great strategy for it, to be honest. It's just something that sort of, with experience, seemed to happen less and less to me, although still occasionally happens. So yeah, I guess I would point towards tactics training, but overall, I think I might want to come up with a better answer to that question because it is something that happens a lot to everyone, and like most problems, it's a good idea to address it. So anyways, that's an interesting problem that it doesn't have to do with tactics or strategy. It's almost like an attention problem. So I kind of, which absolutely happens to all of us. So I wonder if I could come up with a routine for preventing those types of errors. Anyways, this trades into a rook and pawn endgame, but really, it's a bummer because this was definitely a playable game, and actually it was a game that Black was winning. Black had won that center pawn, but if the piece gets hung and there's an 8-point swing, it's just tough to win a game like that. Yeah, no, I mean, I don't think yeah, no, I don't know if it's overconfident, but it's just, for me, it happens for sure, and it's an attention error. I still have them from time to time. They happen more often when I'm like playing chess on my phone on the subway or like walking around or something. That's when I'm really vulnerable to those one move mistakes. But I sort of wonder if there's like some system, like I should probably read like the Grandmaster's Mind or something like that. But if I wonder if there's a system of like double checks that you could do that would effectively screen out these like hanging pieces and that kind of thing. Yeah, I don't know. Very interesting. But a good question for sure. But unfortunately, yeah, knight takes c6, and it's going to be very difficult for Black to win this game. So I guess the main thing that I would do is come up with an opportunity to what improvement can be made there. Yeah, maybe playing more bullet. I don't know. I guess I would say play Puzzle Battle or the Lee Chess Puzzle Rush thing over bullet. Playing bullet teaches bad habits because it forces you to make compromises in the opening. For me, I end up playing openings that are very unsound in bullet, so I've sort of steered away from that. But with Puzzle Battle, I think you can, basically have those super quick, practice. So I guess I would say, yeah, Puzzle Rush, Puzzle Battle, fast tactics training. Will probably help you out a bit here on these one types of moves. Thank you very much, Agent. Thank you very much for the follow. I appreciate it. But yeah. So, anyways, this is yeah, it's a very interesting. It's an interesting problem. It happens to everyone. But I think Puzzle Battle, Puzzle Rush, or high speed tactics training probably helps a bit with those one move tactics. But that's what this game unfortunately came down to, Hyperion. Thank you very much for sending it. It was a good opening and a good start, but errors like those, which we all make, do lose games. Very interesting. Thank you for sending it. Let's take a look at the last one for the night. This one is from Anch. And Anch is playing white in this game. Oops, it's in Lee Chess. I'll pull, just pull the PGN. Here we go. Cool. So Anscher's playing black here. It's a King's Pawn opening, Scandinavian, cool. I did play the Scandinavian. I don't know if there's any, yeah, no, totally. I'm thinking about it, Jack. I think it's really, a good question. How do you, like, these are very, like, practical training things. I'd be curious to see what grandmasters say about it, but at the same time, grandmasters do occasionally tilt as well. So interesting. But thank you very much for sending that, Hyperion. I'm gonna come up with, maybe I'll come up with some type of training or procedure that we can do to try to screen out those one move errors. Anyways, this is interesting. I used to play Queen D6 and C6 in the Scandinavian. So like Queen D6, D4, C6. That's how I used to play the Scandinavian. Queen D8 I know is also a playable move. I think there's three main ones, and they're Queen A5, Queen D6, Queen D8. All right, so Queen D8, Bishop E2, C6, and here, yeah, interesting. So if you like playing D6 or C6, it sometimes pairs well with Queen on D6. Maybe. I mean, I'm up for any solution to that. I don't have a great one for how to maintain attention and avoid one move errors. I would like to, but I do notice that I make a lot fewer one move errors than I did at an earlier point in my my chess playing. I think high speed tactics training is probably a good idea. But it's a tough question. Don't know the answer. Yeah, it's always practice. Practice solves most chess problems. Knight F6, Bishop G5, Bishop B4. And here it's a Scandinavian game. Black has basically Black has not made any errors, I don't think, but has a relatively confined position. This cool. All right, cool tactic. That looks like it works. Okay, so here's where there begins to be an issue. Here I think the improvement is keeping these pawns, keeping these pawns locked up. Basically, D4 could potentially become a place where you can generate an attack. The attack would probably go like Knight F6, Rook D3, Rook D7, Rook D1, Rook D8, or something like that, and then maybe try E5. But here, basically, White has made his pawns backwards. Black's pawn structure is much better. White does have the better minor piece. I think a lot better minor piece than the knight, since the position's pretty open and Black has a lot of pawns on light squares. But I think Knight F6 is probably the way to play it. I understand the desire to create more freedom in this position with E5. Like I totally get that. That makes intuitive sense as a plan. But this pawn structure is actually not particularly strong, particularly if this rook is facing towards a backwards pawn. So like with E5, you basically have this backwards pawn and offer an opportunity to either exchange it or advance it. And both of those I think are better than yeah, I mean this one I guess technically is defendable with A3. But a backward pawn on an open file is a good point of attack for Black. So there I would say Rook D7 and then Rook D8 is probably the best idea. I wouldn't worry too much about. Yeah, I mean I think that's the best plan. I think giving your opponent an opportunity to get a backward pawn off of an open file is I think you should apply pressure to that pawn and not offer white an opportunity to get get out of that basically. Um, Otherwise, I think this is all pretty interesting. Let's see. Yeah, sorry. I bounced. I'll go back to where you're talking about, Natisse. It's interesting. Scandinavian Queen D8 is a little bit of a passive opening, but fine and solid enough. Um, I if you have any interest at all, Queen D6 paired with C6 is a Scandinavian opening that I think might be fun to play. The queen is actually much less vulnerable on d6 than it is on than it appears to be on d6. You play like c6 on the next move, and actually have basically a pretty similar position than what you have, except your queen has better placement. So this position versus this position. The queen is actually not bad on queen d6. And then there's actually sort of a cool tactic that comes up a lot where the white plays bishop f4 to threaten the queen, and then the queen goes to b4, and it actually holds up pretty well on b4. Anyways, it's a different approach to a relatively similar opening, but I know for a fact that it's pretty playable. There's some grandmasters that play it. Here, I'm not sure if this bishop trade is such a good idea. Like, I don't think this knight is causing you too many problems, and just in general, like, having a bishop is more valuable than a knight. So, so making that trade unprompted probably isn't the best. It's fine, but it's like not. There's some value in holding on to your bishop pair, and that move prevents you from doing that. This all looks okay, and this tactic was great. I thought this was great. This ended up, it was well calculated, and it ended up leading black in a good direction. But this, I think, is the one move where I would revisit. E5 is a problem. I think knight f6 here, and then threats on d4. This backward pawn on an open file, you may not be able to win it, but just by applying force on it, I think you can basically improve your pieces with tempo. So like this, and then maybe e5, maybe not e5, but yeah, probably e5 actually. E5 probably does become playable here, but it's just sort of the pawn structures are extremely important, and like bailing out your try not to. This sort of bails out the weakest pawn on the white side, so that I think is an improvement just in terms of strategy. Other than that, this swings relatively quickly towards white, but I think you have some good things. I think you have some really good things to feel good about in this game. I think that whole trade for the queen, like this whole queen trade, was well calculated and led to an advantage for black. But the real thematic issue with this game, one other thing, I think the only other thing that I would even think of as potentially not being that great is this unprompted trade, removing your bishop pair against this knight on f3. So I think this is probably not the best, not a huge problem, but not the best, just because you're having a bishop pair long term has some value, and this sort of eliminates that. But the real move in this game that I think black could make improvements on is knight f6 as opposed to e5. This is just too good a target for attack for black, and I think black has pretty good chances if he applies force on this pawn in the right way. It basically trades off a pawn that was fine for you for a pawn that was bad for him, and that's not a good trade. So you know, I don't know if this pawn ends up being winnable, but it's certainly a good point of attack, and you shouldn't let white off the hook for that if you don't have to. Yeah, but anyways, it was a good game. I liked that. I liked that whole queen trade. I thought that was good tactics and well calculated. Definitely, you know, I think, you know, all these games are progress, and the fact that anyone's looking at them and reviewing them, and you're taking the time to have a review of them is going to be progress. I recommend tactics training to everyone, including myself, and overall. Oh, what about knight d5 in this position? Yeah. I think it's good. Yeah, I think that knight d5 is a good outpost. The main thing that I'm focused on is not eliminating this d4 pawn, because this is such a good place for black to attack along this open file. Knight d5 is probably going to become a, you know, yeah. So it's either going to be a good outpost for black, or it's going to become or it's going to trade your worst minor piece for white's better minor piece. So yeah, I think knight d5 is a good move in that position. I think that's a solid. I think that's a solid play. Plays like rook d3 and then knight d5 is yeah, it's just fine. I mean, there's other things that black needs to keep track of, but overall, I think, yeah, securing this outpost, a very strong outpost with a lot of different threats going on from the knight, is a good idea. And if the bishop trades for the knight, that's also fine. But the main point of attack, I think, should be this pawn on d4. Backward pawn on an open file is definitely worth something for you and is a point of vulnerability for white. But yeah, overall, really interesting game. I hope all this is helpful, and I learn a lot from these games. So it's I hope the reviews are helpful. Yeah, next stream is tomorrow at 10 a.m. I think we still have some open slots for that, but if anyone wants to send more games, please send them over. Yeah, I really appreciate all of you guys participating and being here. And yeah, it's awesome. I think it's great, and I'm enjoying doing this. So thank you all for your help. Awesome. Next stream at 10 a.m. tomorrow Eastern time. Have a good night, everyone. Thanks. Bye.